to another edition of Story Time with nOmO.
Let me tell you a story that's becoming all too common in Florida. Imagine a quiet stretch of rural land where families have lived for over 100 years. Their grandparents farmed it, their parents raised children on it. They know every tree, every ditch, every shift in the wind. The land is zoned agricultural, and life moves at the pace of seasons and not at spreadsheets. Then one day, a growing village to the south decides it needs more land for the future. It annexes a massive 5,700-acre parcel of agricultural land. And almost overnight, that land is rezoned from farming to light industrial. Then a planned unit development, a PUD, is approved. Warehouses, distribution centers, data centers, and truck traffic all begin to appear. And then something happens that the rural families never saw coming. Their small pocket of land, the place their families have called home for generations, is now completely surrounded by industrial development. They didn't ask to be annexed. They did not consent to the rezoning. They simply woke up one day to find themselves living in an enclave, a small island of rural life, trapped inside a sea of industry. This isn't science fiction. This is happening right now in parts of Florida. To understand how this happens, we need to look at Florida Statute Chapter 171, the Municipal Annexation or Contraction Act. This law was written with good intentions. It tries to bring order to the messy process of cities growing. The statute emphasizes three key principles. Contiguity. Annexed land should connect to the existing city. Compactness. Annexation should be reasonably shaped, not long, skinny fingers that snake through the countryside. No enclaves. The law actually discourages the creation of isolated pockets of incorporated land surrounded by a city. In fact, Section 171.046 openly states that enclaves create problems for planning and service delivery, and it declares it is state policy to eliminate them. Yet here we are. When a city annexes a large area like 5,700 acres and immediately rezones it industrial, it often leaves behind small pockets of rural land. These pockets become what we call enclaves, land that's now surrounded on all sides by the city, even though the owners never asked to join. The law gives cities powerful tools to grow, but it also creates situations where long-term rural landowners can find themselves in what seemed to be a near impossible position. Now let's talk about the people living inside the pocket. These are not recent buyers who knew the risks. These are multi-generational families. Peoples whose roots in that soil go back over a century. They didn't buy the land as an investment. They inherited it. They worked it. They raised their children on it. And now they wake up every morning to the sound of trucks. They catch warehouses rising where fields used to be. Their property value drops because no one wants to buy rural land surrounded by industry. Their way of life, the very reason they stayed on that land for generations, is being quietly erased. This is not just a legal issue. It's a human issue. It raises some very uncomfortable questions. Does a city have the right to fundamentally change the character of the land surrounding longtime owners without their consent? What happens to the idea of home when the world around it is transformed against your will? Where is the balance between growth and fairness? The questions we need to ask. What we're seeing here is a collision between two powerful forces in Florida. On one side is growth and the relentless pressure of population increase. Economic development and the desire for more tax bases as well. Cities need land to grow. Developers want to build. Local governments want revenue. On the other side is stability. the desire of families to keep what they have built over generations, the right to live in peace on land that has been in the family for a century, the belief that home should mean something more than just a piece of real estate. Chapter 171 tries to manage this tension, but it's an imperfect tool. It gives cities broad power to annex, but it also creates the very enclaves it claims it wants to eliminate. The result of situations like this one I described, where rural families find themselves living in what feels like an occupied territory, surrounded by development they never asked for and now cannot escape. It's a question of balance, and this brings us back to a theme we've explored throughout our time together: balance. In the Triune Anti-Fragile way, we talk about the need for balance between the spiritual core, the embodied interface, and the strategic architecture. We talk about not getting lost in the micro or overwhelmed by the macro. The same principle applies here. When a city annexes 5,700 acres and rezones it industrial, it's playing a very large game, the macro game of growth, tax base, and economic development. But in doing so, it can completely destroy the micro, the lives, homes, and heritage of people who were already there. You see, true wisdom in land use is not about choosing between growth and preservation. It's about finding a balance. It's growth that does not destroy the very communities it claims to serve. The rural owners in this story are not asking for the world to stop. They're asking for fairness. They're asking to be seen. They're asking that their century of stewardship on that land count for something. Florida's changing fast, and the pressure to develop is enormous. But we must remember that every acre of land has a story. Every family that has lived on it for generations carries a piece of that story. When we allow large-scale annexations and rezonings to swallow those stories without consent or compensation, we're not just changing zoning maps, we're changing the soul of a community. The law gives us tools. Chapter 171 gives us rules. But rules without wisdom become weapons. The question we must ask ourselves, as planners, as lawyers, as citizens, is this: are we building communities, or are we simply consuming land? Because if we're only consuming land, then one day we'll wake up and realize we've eaten everything that made this place worth living in. And that, my friends, is a loss no amount of industrial development can ever replace.